When it comes to messaging, and Democrats who are on the campaign trail as we speak with a Congress that is not in Washington, is this an ad that's already been written for you by the president?
Well, certainly. I mean, of course, we've already started playing it. We've already been pushing it out all throughout the country, because what a remarkable statement from a president of the United States to suggest that the only thing the federal government should be focused in on is, of course, fighting wars of choice around the world at an enormous expense, at the expense of hardworking Americans right now who are really struggling based on this disastrous economic policy that Donald Trump has pushed over the course of the last year, which is making it harder for people to already afford their lives, and this war now, of course, making it even more difficult. Look, the reality is he's made it very clear what his values are, and these are choices, of course, and he's decided to pick fights around the world, and again, to make it clear that people who, need child care in this country, people who are concerned about the rising costs of groceries and the lack of affordable housing and the fact that they can barely afford their utility costs or fill up their gas. The reality is right now people are struggling, and Donald Trump is ignoring their cries for help.
But when it comes to the midterms, what is the priority for Democrats? Are you going to try to wrap this all into one? I mean, the president ran on affordability. Gas prices are going up. How are Democrats planning to capitalize and message on that? Because sometimes the messaging is not your party's forte, but there is a lot there to do. How are you going to make this happen for your party?
Well, listen, I would say if you look at the last year, we have had tremendous success. We've won over 90% of the elections on the ballot, historic overperformance, which is about 14 percentage points on average, which is an all-time high. And the through line is that all of our candidates focused almost exclusively on affordability, making sure that we address the anxiety of this nation right now, which is really around the economy. Many Americans are falling behind, and no one feels like this economy is working for them right now. And so as we go into these last 214 days left until the midterm election, we're going to focus on three really important things. One is, of course, affordability. How do we make sure that you can afford to get to work? How do we make sure that you actually have a job to go to? How do we make sure that you can afford your rent or your mortgage or putting groceries on the table, as I mentioned earlier? Second, we're going to focus on the emerging healthcare crisis in this country based on the big ugly bill and the fact that they're going to take away so much revenue from healthcare systems in this country. 300 hospitals are going to close. A quarter of nursing homes are going to close. Healthcare premiums are rising on almost every American right now. Healthcare is an emergent crisis in this country. And the last thing we're going to focus on is fixing this corrupt and rigged system that only benefits the wealthy, the well-connected, and the powerful at the expense of everyone else in this country. And so that's what Democrats are focused on. We're going to focus on delivering real solutions to what's vexing the American people right now, and not focus just on fighting wars of choice around the world that are costing the average American household is paying $400 more a month to litigate this war in Iran, and it's $400 a month they don't have based on this disastrous economy that Donald Trump has pushed.
With a gallon of gas at $4.10 today on average, according to AAA. Ken, we want to talk to you about resources. We had a conversation just last week on Bloomberg with Congresswoman Susan Del Bene, who chairs the DCCC. They're targeting Trump plus 11, plus 13 seats in some districts, making this a much wider effort. I realize you have history on your side. You might even have the message on your side, but how about money? The RNC has a nearly 7-to-1 money advantage over the DNC right now. You pulled in $10.3 million in February, the RNC $18.5 million. Do you have the money, the resources to pursue that many seats?
Well, absolutely. And in combination with the DCCC, the DS, and our other partners, of course we do. And look, we don't need to outraise the Republicans. We just need to raise enough money to be in the ring so we can compete and fight. And I'll give you an example on that. In Texas, we flipped a state Senate seat there. It was a plus 17% Trump district. Our candidate won by 14 percentage points, meaning it was a 31-point swing. And the Republican opponent there raised $2.5 million to our candidate's $380,000. Again, we don't need to outraise the Republicans. We just need to have enough money to compete. And look, last year we raised a record amount of money for a first-year chair of the Democratic National Committee. We raised a record amount of money, and what was fueling that was the grassroots dollars. The small donors averaging $51. That was what was fueling our effort, and we raised a record amount, which allowed us to win a record amount of races. Of course, we've got wind at our back. We've got momentum, as you mentioned. We've got a message that's resonated, and we'll have the resources to make sure that we can compete. And as you mentioned, because of this historic overperformance, we've been able to expand out the map. We can now, any Republican who sits in a 14% or less district in this country is now targeted by the Democratic Party because they are vulnerable. And that's 50 Republicans who sit in those seats are now on our target list. We've got a great path to the U.S. House, and as crazy as it sounds, there's an equal chance of us winning the U.S. Senate back as well.
And almost every time I have a Democrat on or talk to a Democrat, I ask them two questions. Who is the leader of the Democratic Party? And if you actually take back the House and or the Senate, is there anything you can actually do to stop the legislative agenda of a president who seems not to care whether he has congressional approval for most of the things he does?
Well, let me answer the first thing. Look, there's many leaders of the Democratic Party. I happen to be one of them. I'm the chair of the DNC. But isn't that part of the problem?
Yeah,
well, no, look, this is always the problem for either party when they're out of power, right? The reality is that, the president and the party in power has a much bigger megaphone. That's just always the case. And so we've got great governors out there. We've got great mayors out there. We've got wonderful members of Congress. So there are many leaders. And of course, we're a big tent party. That means we've got lots of different ideas out there, right? And as we come into this presidential race in 28 and we get a nominee, of course, then, it will start to come into focus who the leader of the Democratic Party is. But until that time, right, we have many leaders who are delivering for the American people, who are actually standing up. I've been very proud of watching what our governors have done during this last year to actually deliver on promises that they've made to the American people. I've been proud of watching our mayors use the power they have to protect communities in this country from this administration. I've been really proud of our members of Congress using their platforms to actually speak out and hold this president accountable. And so, look, there are a lot of leaders of the Democratic Party, and look, I get that question a lot. I'm very proud of the fact that we have so many great leaders in this party who are standing up, delivering on the promises they made to the American people, and actually fighting to make a difference in their lives. And on the second piece, look, I think when we win back control of the Congress and hopefully the Senate, our job is to pass legislation, to actually stand up and do what we said we were going to do, and put it on Donald Trump's desk. And, make him make a choice. If he's going to actually sign legislation that's going to bring down the costs for American people and actually help create jobs and actually restore health care access in this country and help, families that are struggling with child care and finding jobs. At the end of the day, if we do those things and the president still refuses to sign them, the Republicans will have no chance of winning in 2028. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on doing our jobs and delivering on the promises that we made to the American people. It will be up to the president to decide whether or not he wants to join Democrats at that point.
When we consider what primary voters are looking for here in this midterm cycle, there was fascinating research out recently from the group Third Way, of course, famously moderate, according to some dangerously moderate, depending on the progressive you might be speaking with. They talked about what primary voters' lives are like, what primary voters are looking for, and it came down to basically a question or an argument of pragmatism versus progressivism. 75% of Democratic, self-identified Democratic primary voters said they prefer pragmatism to 25% progressivism. Is that going to be an important theme to follow in this campaign cycle?
Well, look, I don't like to put a label on any of this. I do agree that what Americans want right now is results. They're sick and tired of watching parties, politicians from both parties, say one thing and then get into office and do another. Mm-hmm. They want people to stand up and fight for them and deliver. And, that's it's one of the challenges, both for the Republican Party and it has been for the Democratic Party. But what I think you're seeing right now, which is why Donald Trump's numbers are so low and the Republican Party is in jeopardy right now of losing both chambers of Congress and has been losing throughout the country right now, is you have one party party that's actually delivering. Look at what Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill did on day one after they were elected governor. Look at what other Democratic elected officials are doing throughout the country to stand up and deliver on those promises. And the Republicans continue to ignore the pleas of this country to focus on the issues that matter most to the Americans. And so, look, I think at the end of the day, you can call it pragmatism, or you can just, call it, look, delivering on your promises. One of my first bosses said that you should never separate the life you lead from the words you speak. And it's critical right now because most Americans are just sick and tired of politics as usual. They want someone who's going to stand up, be their champion, and help them actually get ahead, not just get by.
All right, on that note, Americans are sick and tired of politics. They are frustrated with Congress members in both parties, and they have a new accountability buddy making its presence known, and that is TMZ, the site we usually think of as gossip. We spoke to Harvey Levin of that site about why they are now going after members of Congress who are seen on vacation while the government is shut down. We're going to play some sound for you.
When you look at what we're doing with these photographs and videos, it's really the big thing we're doing, because what we're doing is we're showing how the public feels about them. And I think they've lost that big view of it and started looking at it, the blame game, that the Republicans didn't vote on this or the Democrats didn't do that. And they're not stepping back and looking at Congress as a whole.
We only got about 30 seconds here, but I'm curious what your reaction to this is, because it does tap into a broader spectrum of the American public really annoyed that Congress is not doing what they sent them there to do.
Yeah, I've always said sunlight is the best disinfectant. It's important for folks to hold elected officials and leaders in Congress and throughout the country accountable. And, during a time when government shut down and you see, politicians taking vacations, politicians, not doing their job while people are suffering, of course people are going to be frustrated. And so, again, this should be a wake-up call to every politician in each party to make sure that in times of crisis like this in this country, it requires people to stand up, do their job, and deliver for the American people. And again, Democrats are doing that. Republicans are sitting on their asses while people are suffering in this country.